I am going to be talking about community engaged scholarship in the ways that I have come to know it as a grad student here. And I'll start by introducing myself a little bit just to give you guys some context on where I'm at. I am a third-year PhD student here in Curriculum and Instruction is my main department. And right now I am preparing for prelims at the end of the semester, so I'm in the early stages of dissertation work. And my research interests revolve around literacy and language, kind of wrapped up together, and thinking about that in rural spaces, specifically of Wisconsin right now. And so I'm going to be touching on a few of those things today. And then also, I'm currently collaborating with the WIT department on a project that they have right now with VR headsets and rural libraries of Wisconsin, and how I'm thinking about CES through that. A couple of places that have kind of built me and brought me to thinking about community engaged scholarship are these institutions. I started out my work in my career as an elementary school teacher at these two independent schools is really what they were, both project learning based, which is kind of centered around what students are interested in and building up from there. And after I worked for a bit of time as an elementary school teacher, I then shifted into thinking about adult education, which is how I started working with Literacy Network. That's a nonprofit here in Madison that works with refugees, people in Madison who maybe went through the K-12 system in the US, but struggled with literacy and need help on their literacy skills. And also people who are learning English for the first time or as a second language. So I started working there, and while working there, also partnered with Madison College, and I now teach some courses over there around introduction to reading and writing skills for new college students or returners to college. And I have a wide array of students there. And then obviously here I'm working with the Curriculum and Instruction department with our undergraduate students and new student teachers that are a part of our program here, specifically in the language classes and in the literacy, reading, and writing classes. And some supervisor positions as well. So that is kind of what I'm coming to you all with today. All of those things have kind of helped me think through what I wanted to have as my minor, which is community engaged scholarship. The structure of the talk today is these kind of 4 principles that I'll be working around, which is understanding CES, how I've come to understand it anyway, how I'm trying to see CES through the projects I'm in and the future projects I want to do, how to navigate thinking about that work as a grad student specifically, and then looking forward to ideas for my dissertation, and who I'm working with right now to think through those things. So to get started, I'll just talk a little bit about my early understanding of community engaged scholarship, or what I think maybe some people might come to it thinking of it as, which is kind of like the elemental basic things like, oh, it's part of community service, or you're doing outreach or helping others, which isn't to say that that doesn't happen, but to boil it down to just that is a little bit elementary. So those were just kind of my early thinkings about it, which can sometimes lead to some misconceptions like you're always helping or you're always doing good, which that's the goal, but sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, and you have to revisit and reevaluate yourself and who you're working with to make sure it's coming through as helping in all aspects. And as I started taking courses in the community engaged scholarship world, I started to change my thinking about CES. Through the courses, I had a lot of great mentors and teachers that started challenging my thinking through the readings and then experiences that they brought to the class and shared about. And I started changing my idea of I'm coming in to help you to it's a reciprocal thing. Like we could help each other, and maybe you're bringing some knowledge to me and I'm bringing some knowledge to you, and it's more of a partnership rather than me giving something to you, a one-way sort of thing. And that CES is really built on that reciprocity, but also the relationships that you build with community partners and with the other people you're working with. And this image over here I thought was interesting. That's kind of like boils it down to what I was just saying. It is about doing work together, and it's about a co-creation of knowledge, just in a way that's helpful to the community and maybe also helpful to the institution you're working with. Both of you are creating knowledge that can be sustainable for the community. And it's also about being in relationship with institutions, community partners, and whoever else you are working with. A really interesting quote that I found from the Yale School of Medicine on community engaged scholarship, I thought I would uplift on this next slide because they define it in these terms, and I'll just read it out loud to you guys. Community engaged research is a process that incorporates input from people who the research outcomes will impact and involves such people or groups as equal partners throughout the research process. This involvement may include co-designing research questions to solve problems, making decisions, influencing policies, and creating programs and interventions that affect their own lives. Community engagement often involves partnerships and coalitions that help mobilize resources and influence systems, change relationships among partners, and serve as catalysts for changing policies, programs, and practices, which I thought was a really eloquent way of kind of describing community engaged scholarship as a whole. And it works in several different facets or departments. In education is where I'm thinking of it now, but it also is something that exists in medicine and other departments within institutions like UW. One thing to note also from this slide is the terms. That was something that tripped me up quite a bit when I first came to understand community engaged scholarship. There's several different acronyms that are used: CES, CER, CBPR. And when I asked my professors, what should I use? They always answered with, what do you think you should use? It's like, oh, okay, well. So that's just kind of true, I guess, in the upper education world, is always like questioning yourself and understanding how you think about it. So CES is what I've kind of settled on, but that obviously stands for Community Engaged Scholarship. CER is Community Engaged Research, I believe. And I think they all mean similar things with maybe some small tweaks, but those are all things you might hear when people talk about this kind of research. And also from Yale's website, they did a great job of starting to get you to think about, if you want to be a CBPR researcher or CES, here are some questions you might ask yourself before you dive into that work. Are you willing to do some of these things that they question? Like, are you able to be transparent? Are you a good listener? Are you going to be able to listen to your community partners? Are you going to be able to be respectful of the communities that you're doing research in? Are you open to being flexible in your research approach, changing research questions, changing the outcomes that you're seeking? And are you open to being to learning or teaching about what you are researching and thinking about? So all these things helped me kind of further my understanding on CES. And I wanted to give like a good solid example of where I think I've seen CES done well. And this one's a very local example, actually. Dr. Travis Wright was one of my teachers with Corey as well in a class that I took for this minor. He kind of works in the counseling psychology department, as far as I understand. And a project that he worked on that I interviewed him about worked around schooling in the Madison School District area, where he came to them and had his own expertise on counseling and kind of said, look, I have these skills and I would love to work with you. Are you in need of somebody who has counseling skills? And if so, in what ways could I be helpful? So rather than coming to them and saying, this is my research question, here's how I want to research it, how can I work with you? He came to the table saying, what is it you would like? How can I help? Can we be a good match? And they ended up figuring out that there was a need for some mentors in the school district for their students who were experiencing homelessness. So Travis worked on creating a course at UW where the students in that course learned about counseling strategies and then would go into schools as part of that course to work with students. So it was a reciprocal, the school is getting something that they need, the university is getting something they need, and they're both helping each other in this partnership, which I think is a great way to kind of display what CES can do when it's done well and great relationships are made. And I heard about this project through Wisconsin Idea Conference, so I had to put a picture up there because that was such a cool conference. They had so much kind of around this topic there. So if you see this conference come up next year, I think, is when March 2nd, definitely go because they have some great talks, and Travis was talking about his. And the school actually had their liaison come in and talk as well. So it was like a true partnership of a talk that was given about that topic. One other kind of way to describe CES that I learned about that really stuck in my brain was in another course I took in the CES major, and that was from an article by Fleming where he listed out 11 different principles to community-based participatory research. And I'll just read them each out loud to you because they are kind of like what my core values of CES became, because we analyzed these 11 principles quite a bit in that class. But the first one is, if you're doing CES work, you're recognizing the community as its own unit of identity. There's already things that are happening and flowing and occurring within a community, and that you're coming in maybe sometimes as an outsider to understand that community, or maybe an insider, but you need to be thinking about that community as a unit of identity already. Community-based research also builds on strength and resources that are already occurring in the community. So coming in with the mindset of, there's probably great things happening here. How can we utilize those to continue the work that I want to do or continue to help the community? Number 3, facilitates a collaborative, equitable partnership in all phases of research, involving an empowering and power-sharing process that attends to social inequities. So making sure that it's obviously a collaborative partnership rather than I'm coming to get something from you. Number 4, fosters co-learning and capacity building among all partners. Number 5, integrates and achieves a balance between knowledge generation and intervention for the mutual benefit of all partners. So not just that you're generating knowledge for the university, but that you're making sure it's sustainable and something that helps the community. Number 6, focuses on local relevance of public health problems and ecological perspectives that attend to the multiple detriments of health. This article was grounded in public health research, obviously, so that one was big for this paper. Number 7, involves systems development using a cyclical and iterative process. This was really a really big foundational principle that I still think about when I think about CES, which is that it can be a process that is cyclical in terms of you might have a research question that you start with and then you have to come back and revisit it and maybe change it around. And it's something that you constantly are thinking about and being flexible in changing because the real world changes all the time. These communities can change and what they prefer or would like to do can change. Number 8, disseminates results of all partners and involves them in a wider dissemination of results. Number 9, involves a long-term process and commitment to sustainability. So even after you leave, the hope is that whatever you've helped to create in that community can sustain itself even without you. Number 10, openly addresses issues of race, ethnicity, racism, and social class and embodies cultural humility. And number 11, works to ensure research rigor and validity, but also seeks to broaden the bandwidth of validity with respect to research relevance. So I wanted to pause and make sure that I touch on each one of those things because even after the class occurred where I came upon this, I still returned to it several semesters later and thought about different aspects of it and how it can come through in my own work. So I wanted to make sure we stopped and thought about that. So all of that thinking and all those classes, those mentors kind of brought me to where I am today and how I think about CES. These are the core principles that I can kind of take away from that list and all the classes and everything. These are what stand out to me. Reciprocity, mutual benefit, shared authority, sustainability, and an iterative process with this work. And kind of a fun graphic that went along with the last one I had, where it talks about, okay, all these things we've talked about, how do I start doing it though? Which I think a lot of grad students are like, okay, all these theories and such, but when it comes down to it, how does it happen in practice? Where do I start? Because it feels like so much at one time. So you just start with thinking about, what do I want to be working on? What is my passion? Where do I want to see my work flow? And what expertise can I bring to the table to meet with the people that I want to work with? Who is interested in building a relationship around this? This is huge. Who in the community wants to also be working on this? Who can you partner with that already also has a passion, where you're not asking people to show up, where they want to show up and they want to be working on this? And what are the existing partnerships or networks that already are occurring that you can partner with? Which all that kind of brings me to my own research. So that was kind of an understanding of what CES is, but now I'll start to move into where I want to go with this research, my own particular research interests. And that is grounded in rural education, rural schooling, rural communities specifically. And I wanted to start by giving you context on the state of Wisconsin, what areas of Wisconsin are considered rural. Towns are also sometimes considered rural by the federal government, but there's like an even more rural definition where you're kind of rural and then you're really, really rural. So like towns are sometimes closer to suburban areas, so that's how they are categorized, but rural is like this would be like very rural. There's like not much around you, versus a rural area where you might drive a little bit easier to Madison or some bigger city. So to give you context, that is how much of Wisconsin, these little green areas, that is rural. So pretty much all of Wisconsin is rural, with some blue sprinkled in, those suburban and urban areas. But a large part of Wisconsin is rural, which is what makes me feel like it's an important topic to be talking about today. And then, as I said before, I work with rural communities and the schools, but also the libraries within that community, because sometimes those libraries are community hubs for rural spaces. They offer things like Wi-Fi, DVDs, or books and such, but they become kind of like these pinnacles of places for information and community events or things like that. But after seeing the rural spaces of Wisconsin, this is kind of more of a breakdown of the different library systems that exist in Wisconsin. And I wanted to point this out because as I've learned about libraries in my time, I've realized that these spaces are spaced out around Wisconsin, but within these systems, some libraries will share resources across those systems, which is important because places like South Central Library System, where Madison is located, has a lot of resources in the Madison area that can be moved to like Sauk County or wherever else, versus a more rural place that has less cities in its cutout, I guess, would have maybe less resources. So we're trying to think about how to share resources across even these systems, even though they're already like bunched together, as is through the library system. We're trying to think about how can we move different items that are needed across the state of Wisconsin through those systems. So with that, I will talk a little bit about the current project that I'm on and how I was trying to grapple with CES in this project. And I will say this project was never established as something that was supposed to be a CES necessarily. I was just coming to it through the lens of how could we make this a CES project, or are there aspects of CES that could be uplifted from this project? But it was never something that was started with that in mind necessarily. So keep that in mind as I'm talking about it. I'll give you a quick overview of what the project was. It was a project where rural librarians in the state of Wisconsin were offered the opportunity to get VR reality headsets where games created here at UW were downloaded on the system. And they were given those for free as long as they worked with us for a year, talking about how they engage with their community, how they talk about science with their rural communities, if science is a topic people are interested in, or want to be engaged in. And we were also trying to think of how can we bring Hispanic communities in rural spaces into the conversation as well, how to make outreach a little bit better for them in rural spaces. So all of those things were kind of the project goals that we had with this specific project. My role as a grad student was thinking about that with the team, but also really I was doing a lot of qualitative data collection, interviewing librarians, going to these spaces, taking pictures, sometimes jumping in and being like a librarian and helping with these projects and VR headsets, their workshops that they were creating around it. And then co-authoring, I worked on a paper with the people on this project to write about the aspects of the project. And why we were interested in rural libraries is because, as I said before, they're kind of community hubs for those rural contexts where a lot of times the resources are limited. And we also wanted to make sure that we were understanding the importance of the local knowledge that was occurring in these rural spaces and not just ignoring what already existed there. We wanted to kind of understand how those communities were working. And as I was working on this project for the last 2 years, I think it's a 5-year project, so I joined it about halfway through as well. So that's one thing to note. The CES principles I was trying to think about as I came into the project was how we could build relationships with the librarians more and kind of co-define goals with the librarians rather than come in with these research agendas that the project had, which was tough, right? Halfway through the project, I'm coming in and trying to think about how can we co-define. So it didn't work out perfectly, but it was just something I was trying to think about and come to it as a grad student with already. And I wanted to also uplift that the rural areas of Wisconsin are sometimes thought about as deeply white areas, but actually in Wisconsin there's quite a bit of Hispanic community presence there, and that's why this project had that as a point of consideration, because we wanted to make sure we included people in those communities. And every rural place was a little bit different. Some rural places had a lot of white population, some had majority Hispanic and little white. So it was interesting to see how different libraries came to this project with different ideas and perspectives. But Wisconsin, for example, specifically has a $45 billion dairy industry, and a lot of that depends on immigrant workers. And it goes back many years that there's been a Hispanic presence in Wisconsin, but a large majority of it does work with the dairy industry. So with that project, a couple reflections and challenges I had or saw as a grad student in the process when thinking about CES specifically was how slow our pace was of relationship building. It felt like that took so long because we were working with what libraries were coming to the table with. Sometimes a librarian would work with us for a few months and then suddenly be overwhelmed and drop out. So we'd have to find a new librarian and try to relationship build with them. Sometimes the librarians became frustrated with what we were asking to help with, and they felt like it just didn't align with what they needed, so they would drop out for that, and that was totally fair. It was kind of a process of figuring out which places worked with what we wanted and wanted what we could offer, and felt like we were helping them in regards. So it was like more of a reciprocal relationship that we were looking for. And I think in CES, that's what I've learned most, is that it's okay if that doesn't always work out. Sometimes it just is that way, and it's better to find a partner who it really works with and gels well, rather than trying to force it to work with somebody who it just doesn't work with their interests. So that was a really hard part of the process. A second part was, again, navigating those institutional structures that weren't really built for CES. We had funding that we got for a year. We had to give this report, this report, this report. We were funded by the NSF. So it was reports that you had to give, and you had to have so many publications by this time, which was just wow, this is not working with librarians who are wanting to talk about this instead of what we wanted to focus on. So there was a lot of structures to be working with and thinking about. a lot of lessons that I learned, and I think our team learned, was that we needed to have some humility, listening, and flexibility. So even though we came in saying things like, oh, we'd love to bring the Hispanic community in to working with VR and thinking about polar research, we quickly learned that maybe that's not something they're even interested in. Let's reevaluate and think about, okay, as librarians, what do you think your community would like to see? Would they like to see programming around holidays that they enjoy, or what is it that they'd actually like to see, rather than us coming in and saying, you should be interested in this? And then also library programming and timelines. I have a couple pictures of like other awesome, great things that the libraries were doing that would sometimes conflict with our timeline of, okay, we can come in and help with these VR projects on this date. And they would say, actually, we have a really cool community reads happening on that day. You never asked us like if that day would work. So it was a really quick learning process of, okay, we need to be in constant communication and really clear about what we're both expecting to make sure it actually flows and is successful. But these are two of the libraries that we worked with, Baraboo and Evansville, rural libraries, and they just had great things happening. And it felt like a little bit hard to say, actually, let's worry about VR. So just a lot of humility in that, and recognizing that we're not always number one on their mind, and that's okay. Also, some reflections that I had with my advisor while we were working on this project was we started to think about maybe doing a review of literature on libraries who are working with Hispanic communities in rural areas and the best practices that they came up with to try and then bring that into our project. And one article that we came across, we could not find very many academic articles when we did this research for rural libraries specifically, but we found quite a few, like, how do I want to put it, like informational pieces that were written by people like librarians about things that were working well in their communities. So we decided, okay, let's focus on, even though these aren't academic, let's think about these public articles that are talking about a lot of these great things and how we can actually partner with them. And this was just a really, really cool example where it was a successful outreach specialist in Oregon who was grappling with the exact things we were trying to grapple with. And she was really successful in engaging with her community. She had a very small staff. She was one librarian for like 3 small communities that all use this library. And she just wanted to have Hispanic individuals come into her library more often and help them with whatever they wanted or needed. So she was just trying to get the word out that she had resources that she could help with. She could be a community hub. And I think she was Hispanic herself, so she had like the language that she could connect with as well. And a couple things she figured out ways to work with, and I thought this was like, okay, CES could be, what an opportunity for a university to come in and partner with somebody like this, who's so knowledgeable, so thoughtful, and so even without a institution help, like was able to go through some of these struggles and figure out ways to connect with the community. She set up like a bus transportation system to bring people from extremely rural, homes or areas that were really rural into the town. Like even within a rural town, there's like farms that are far out. So she would have a bus that people could get on to come into the library and come see the programming that she had. And she would do like community resource fairs where they'd have like legal services or English class information or basic things like dentistry or health or whatever. She would have like community fairs at the library and offer transportation to get there. She would collab with those partnerships in the town already, like the dentistry and things like that, to come to her library. She would make sure that the outreach worked with what people wanted. So she would poll her community and ask, what is it that you'd like to see? And when people would respond, she would have it at those fairs. She would also go into spaces where she knew some of her friends who were Hispanic were and where the community was at already, like Zumba classes. She would bring books to the Zumba class and do the Zumba class and then offer to check out books with people at the Zumba class. She would go to like radio stations and do talks about what she could offer and just really, really deepen partnerships with local orgs. But it just felt like such a rich article about this is what can happen when one person really feels passionate about something, and imagine if even more partnerships came in and like how how that could be maybe translated to other spaces. So that was kind of one of the pinnacle articles that we had for what we wrote about our VR project, but also about libraries as systems, as these systems that are supporting or not supporting their communities. And so our article is in review right now, and we'll hopefully find out about that sometime soon. But let me make sure I cover what I want to. All that brings me to my own dissertation research, which is thinking about working with libraries in rural spaces and schools as well in rural spaces. And after writing all of that about different articles and how people were working in these rural spaces with their Hispanic communities, it brought me to what I was thinking about for my own project, and that is we had a librarian from this project reach out to us and say, that's a cool project, but actually, do you have anybody that could help us teach free English classes at our library? We have a lot of requests for that, and that's something we actually really could use help with rather than VR polar gaming. So do you have any connections for that? And I said, actually, I would love to be part of that. Can I somehow be involved? And so this librarian and I started to talk about how that could look. She had done English courses for previous libraries she worked at in rural Indiana, and I'm coming to the table with teaching English courses at Literacy Network and Madison College. And I, said I'd love to lead some of these classes if you'd have me and partner with me. So right now, our plan is to hopefully offer some courses in the spring to the community that's asking for this. And my hope is to also partner with schools if they're interested in that area to see how we could collaborate between parents who are learning English and then maybe their children in schools. Are there ways that we can make communication easier? How could I be talking about things that are coming up in schools like the new curriculum or new whatever in these classes and be talking about that to partner with parents more. So that is kind of the hope for my project. It's in the very, very early stages. But all the insights that I've gotten on working with library systems through that WID project have been really, really helpful. And I'm planning to use chat for my theory base for this project, which is thinking about institutions as activity systems. So library as an activity system, what kind of rules do they have to follow? Where do they situate themselves in the community? How do they divide up their labor? How do libraries work within themselves to support the community? And then also how schools work as activity systems to support their community and how they co-collaborate or don't. And then maybe, I was thinking maybe even how UW, if I'm coming from UW, that as a system works and how those three things can work together or not, all as different activity systems in themselves. So that is my hope. We will see if it all works out the way I'm hoping it does, but really I feel passionate about working in a rural space because there's so much richness there, I think, to be thinking about in research in how unique these places can be, and how people interact in those spaces, how they form loyalties with one another. For example, how these community members were coming to the librarian and saying, hey, this is what we hope for. But they were actually coming to her when they saw her out, like at her dentist appointment. They were coming up to her because they knew her from the library and asking for these things because, she's a friend to them. So I think that there's a lot of richness in understanding how those loyalties work in rural spaces and how it comes to be in projects and such. And rural spaces are sometimes upholding these local ways of being as things and expectations that they have for themselves and people around the rural spaces. So I think that is really, really interesting to learn about. But yeah, my hope is to build some sort of project around and for the community, still thinking about how that could be sustainable after I leave. That's a big conversation the library and I are having right now. Since technically I'll be doing free classes, I wouldn't charge anything. Like, I'm using them and they're using me in a way that's respectful and reciprocal, but after I go, who will take my place? So we're talking about all those things as we progress forward in the project. But that is all I have for today. I do want to mention also, though, that CES is my minor and that you can go online and see a little bit more about what classes you have to take for that. But it has been such a foundational part of all the research that I'm thinking about doing and how I view research actually as a whole now versus like day one when I started as a PhD student to now. It's just changed so much, and CES is such a big pillar of that. So I'm really, really grateful for that as a minor, and I would encourage you all to think about it if you don't have a minor yet. But that is all I have, you guys. Thanks for listening. Any questions?